Diagweave. I want to talk about something that I witnessed online today, something I found quite interesting. And the reason is because about 20 years ago, I think it was my only realistic foray into activism, political activism that's worth talking about. About 20 years ago in my city, Waterford, in Ireland, at my own behest, there wasn't many people, there wasn't other people involved really. I attended a sort of demonstration. It was a public meeting held by a group of left-wing activists in Waterford that basically assembled to oppose a development, what's called a mixed use development in Waterford city centre back in 2005 approximately. And the people involved were a college lecturer, I won't name him, a college lecturer and a well-known socialist Workers' Party activist. The socialist, the SWP activist, he would be very familiar in Waterford, and you would see him since I was 4 years of age. I would see this guy protesting. The man must be close to 70 now, but back then he would have been in his 50s, let's say. And I remember I would be going into town with my mother, and you would see this guy selling SWP newspapers, this type of stuff. And when I was in college, you would see him hiding behind the door selling the same newspaper, trying to avoid getting the bums rush out of the college by the staff. And this group of people, as I said, another person involved was a Green Party college lecturer who was also a candidate for the Green Party in the elections, local and national elections. And what they did at the time was they organised a group of people commonly known as NIMBYs, people that were opposed to the development. And I felt that what they were doing was essentially wrong. I came to realise that how a small group. I came to realise and witness how a small group of people could be very effective in opposing something that could be for the common good, and it was at least debatable whether their view of the world was the correct one. I believed it was incorrect, but it was definitely going against the democratic will. The development, I believe, had mostly support, and people were willing to allow it to go through the normal planning process where it would have been rejected or allowed. But these people, basically this Green Party guy and Socialist Workers' Party guy and a few other activists, people that would go on to become members or run for people before profit, basically far left types, they mobilised a very small group of people, residents, people that were living in relative proximity to the development, but some of them right next to it, some of them not so much. But there were essentially a small group of residents that were mobilised to sort of what's called astroturfing, create the impression that there was a grassroots opposition to this development. Now, if you've ever watched West Wing, that TV show, that it's old now, but I remember there was a scene in it where there was a line in it, and it went something along the lines. One of the characters in the West Wing said there was something, you will never hear folk songs written about on behalf of I can't remember what was mentioned, but big business, let's say. So you'll never hear a folk song written defending Walmart. And it was the same with this opposition group to this development. They were able to take advantage of a lot of well-worn tropes about developers and this type of thing. And that put me at a disadvantage because, like in the West Wing, nobody writes folk songs about big business, and the developers were more or less big business. I wouldn't say they weren't huge business. They were probably just medium-sized developers who had access to capital, let's say, which from the point of view of the SWP they're the enemy, let's say. My take on it was misguided, because what was happening in the city at the time was the city centre was stagnating, and it needed new retail. The existing retail was stagnant. It was old. It was the people that were there were not really investing. We had a lot of shopkeepers who made nice money in the city, but they weren't reinvesting in their business. And as a result, the city centre parts of it, in particular, were starting to look kind of shabby. The other thing from an environmental point of view was there was no modern retail. There wasn't many retail units available in new buildings. All the buildings in the city centre were old and weren't suitable for more modern retail. And if you think about it this way, I mean, people who work in retail, they have their own rights. They have rights like every other worker. So they should have canteens and this type of thing, and probably hot and cold water, plumbing, and a lot of these old city centre premises are in late 19th century buildings, and I've seen some of them. I've worked in some of them, and sometimes they just have the shop and a tiny little room in the back, with just a toilet and a kettle or something like this. So a lot of these shops, a lot of the existing retail footprint, it was empty. It was empty. There was something like 200,000 square feet of empty retail units, but they weren't modern and they weren't attractive for retailers to go there. And as a consequence, there was probably losing a lot of money. The Chamber of Commerce, which the SWP would say are a vested interest, were saying they were losing a lot of money. 40 million a year was one figure. That's 20 years ago. 40 million a year was being lost to the local economy by people who are shopping in nearby towns and cities. The nearest city would have been Cork, and you would have had big towns, second tier towns, but they had their own retail offering, and which they were modernising, in particular Kilkenny. So the as far as I was concerned, the environmental argument was their environmental argument was wrong. Their argument was, we don't need this retail. We might want it, but we don't need this retail. My argument was, we do need this retail because people are getting in cars and going to other cities and go and spending their money there and adding to their carbon footprint, etc. And I followed this through to the end, and eventually it got past the planning process in some shape or form. And but then destiny took a different turn, and the 2008 crash. By that time, it was 2000, coming up to 2008. The financial crash happened, and that put paid to the development. It floundered. So brings me to today. I came across this conversation online where somebody was very frustrated about. I got the impression it was a young person, but I don't know. And I also got the impression it was a female, but I don't know either. But maybe they did mention it. I can't remember now. But they were frustrated because what happened was somebody lodged an application for student accommodation across the nearby where they lived, and almost immediately the neighbours started organising themselves in WhatsApp groups, in a WhatsApp group, to find out what they can do to oppose this development. I think this is somewhere in Dublin. And this person was frustrated by this because, as everybody knows by now, like many places in the world, Ireland has a very severe housing shortage, and anything that can be done to alleviate that housing shortage should be welcome. And this would be such a thing, because typically in Ireland, I think most students, they don't reside in dormitories like maybe they might in other places. Most students would basically rent houses. You might have, the average house size in Ireland would probably be 3 bedrooms, so 3 or 4 bedrooms. So a group of students would rent out a house between them, and you might have 2 students in the master bedroom, maybe 2 more in the second bedroom, and 1 in the third bedroom, the small bedroom. And they would divide it up that way and share bills and stuff like this. Back when I was young, students used to they would rent out a room in a lot of people would rent out a bedroom in their house. They might get the students to get their own children to sleep on the couch even, or on a camp bed, and give one of the bedrooms over to the students. It was called digs, and they would provide that room and maybe a breakfast and an evening meal for the students. So that was very common when I was young, and my own parents did that for a while. But this person was very frustrated at this event where all her neighbours basically started organising themselves to oppose this student development. And it wasn't the first time I heard the term. I've heard it in the mainstream media recently as well, the term YIMBY as opposed to NIMBY. NIMBY is not in my backyard, and YIMBY is yes in my backyard. And it seems to be now that there seems to be a growing discontent with NIMBYs because of the housing crisis. They are one of the groups that are getting blamed, but to be fair, it's not completely their fault. But they do have it might be a small part, but they do have a part to play. And my foray into activism back in 2005, I think maybe foreshadowed, and I'm not claiming I'm the only person who was doing this, but it was a very rare thing for somebody, a citizen, to come in on behalf of the people who are opposing the developers. It's a very rare thing for a citizen to do that, I think, who is not connected in some way to through the Chamber of Commerce or something like this, or if they haven't invested in the development themselves. So me and a few people like me who at the time may have done stuff like this probably foreshadowed, I think, something that's starting to happen now, or about to happen, where you might have more activism in favour of development rather than what the historical norm, where activism would be opposed to intensive development, all due to the housing crisis, which exists everywhere now, if you're honest about it. So what was my experience doing this at the time? Well, I was glad I did it. It was very enriching. There was some, if I did it again, if I could go back, I would have done things a little bit differently. It got very heated at times, but it stayed civil in general. And the Green Party college lecturer that I mentioned, to be fair to him, he was honest enough that he acknowledged that nobody ever tried to intimidate him out of his what he was doing. And what he was doing was very serious. He was one of the three most prolific objectors, what became known as a serial objector. So basically a person would take it upon themselves to police the planning process and object to nearly everything that was happening in proximity of where they were. Sometimes it would be in a different part of the country, in a different part of Ireland, and they would do this, and it was very frustrating at the time. And that's not to say some things did need to be objected to, but this person in particular, he was the third most prolific objector in the country, I think, but he only confined his activity into a city, into one small city, the fifth largest city, but cities in Ireland are small in general, and the third, fourth and fifth largest city are between 50,000 people and 60,000 people, and 100,000 people. The second largest city is not even, it's just breaking 200,000, and that's within a huge municipal area, and Dublin itself is the largest, and that's 1.2 million, and it's spread out a lot. So my city, Waterford, at the time was about 50,000. Not a big place, and this man would confine his activity just to that municipality, and basically nothing could get done in the city for a good 5 years, I would say. So he probably caused a lot of economic damage, I would think. So I was trying to be an antidote to this guy because I felt he was going to really damage the city. But the frustrating thing for me was it was very sounds character. I can't think of another word, but kind of character building. So I had to make my own public speeches at meetings and stuff like this in support of the thing, in support of the development, and I didn't have to spend a lot of money, but I spent some money making submissions through the planning process in support of the development. In the wake of that, there was other interested parties like me, citizens, not connected to any developers or businesses or anything like this, who were also interested in doing what I was doing, getting involved in the debate about the development of the city. And at one point we tried to organise a think tank. So how did that get on? Well, not very well. It's typical organising pitfalls, I would describe it as. At some point we had maybe 6 or 7 people willing to do some stuff, and then it became obvious then that you couldn't trust everyone, So it's not that they were working on somebody else's behalf. I don't mean it in that way. Some people just weren't fit for this. You just couldn't trust them. They were sometimes immature. Or I remember we were organising in a pub one night, and one of the guys that was there, he was he kept chatting up girls, chatting up women in the pub. We couldn't get him to focus. He would be there and excuse me for a second, and he'd go to the other side of the pub and start talking to some woman that he knew, young woman that he knew. The other problem then, and a lot of it was very funny looking back on it. I mean, there was a guy, he had, you might have heard the phrase, politics is show business for ugly people. Or if somebody hasn't got the face for television, they might say, I have the face for radio, There was one guy there because he had some media contacts in radio and in the newspaper, and we might have had a chance to make. We probably might have had a possibility to do some radio interviews during the rush. The drive was called drive time radio, commuter radio. This is before the world of podcasts. But this guy, he didn't want to share his. We needed a spokesman, and it was either me or another guy. I wanted the other guy to do it because he spoke better than me. He didn't have such an intense accent, but he wouldn't do it. He wasn't brave enough to do it. So this left the guy, me or the other guy, and I think he wasn't willing to relinquish his contacts. So he basically wanted to do the interview, and the problem with him was, if you have a face for radio, this guy had a voice for silent movies. And in today's climate, it doesn't feel appropriate, but I'm going to say it nonetheless. His voice was very camp. His accent was very camp, almost to like a caricature. So if you've seen, I don't know if he reminded me when he spoke of Dick Emery. There was a comedian in the 70s, Dick Emery, and he used to have these caricatures of gay men, and very camp, very flamboyant, dressed in wide brim pink hats and like a pimp almost, yeah. And when this guy spoke, he sounded like this. So it was so bad, you knew like he just wouldn't be taken seriously by anybody. And also, he didn't have a good way. He didn't understand. He didn't understand what mattered and what didn't matter. For example, Waterford is the oldest city in Ireland. So when it comes to government, he thought this mattered when it came to government investment. But the argument should be made on basically the unique selling points of Waterford, its critical mass, its population, the geographic advantages it has that justifies investment in the city and its hinterland. But he couldn't make these arguments. He would make these very superficial arguments. Oh, it's the oldest city in Ireland. This type of thing, which means nothing at the end of the day. The other problem I had with them was they were all professionals, but they were very childish. And at one point, I thought it was a Waterford thing, something that was a characteristic of Waterford people. But I've moved around a bit since then, and I've noticed that it's actually more common. I've done some work in Germany with people, some projects, and the same thing had happened. It's what I call I have to go off syndrome. So you would, when something would come up, when something would come up where you'd need bodies, some meeting or a hearing, and you needed people there to make arguments and submissions, you'd get this excuse, I can't do it, I have to go off. And if you pressed, where do you have to go? I thought we were serious about this thing. You might get a ridiculously stupid reason. And I mean, I think at one point I had a grown man tell me he had to give his sister a lift into town or something like this. And I mean, we're not talking about a big city. We're talking about a €5 taxi fare, or right, something very. Get a taxi for her and just come to the meeting, silly stuff like this, and almost like I have to visit my nanny. Yeah, so it's this kind of excuses. So basically, I was dealing with talkers and not walkers. There were guys that would have, there were guys that would, they would like to sit down as if they were, and talk about this stuff like like Kissinger. But when it came to actually doing something, they wouldn't. Yeah. So that was the other problem. But at the end of the day, I was successful in technically. I made my submissions, and it wasn't. I made my submissions, and it was successful. It wasn't down to me, of course. There was a main trust by somebody else, the developers, and the thing did get. This development did get through the planning process until the crash happened, and that killed it really. But the thing I would say is this: what I learned going in beforehand, you can't leave things to other people to do. If you think something is wrong, you really have to see if you can do something about it yourself, even if it's in a small way. And if you do get people involved, make sure they're walkers, not talkers. And hopefully you will see more of this now, especially the frustration that's because of the frustration that's there with housing, and because this has gone on for a long time. This person that I mentioned earlier on, that her neighbours are opposing this student accommodation, she described it as people who are probably older than me, who are on the property ladder, probably maybe even have their mortgages paid off, people in their 50s and 60s. And I don't like demonising people, because I'm 50 myself, and I got burned in the property crash in 2008. The house I was living in, the price of it dropped by 60% over a couple of years, and I had to leave Ireland as a consequence. But and I don't like this trend that we have at the moment of demonising people. But hopefully you will see more pushback against the sort of radical chic. You know, this radical chic concept. I can't remember who came up with it. I think the name Kingsley Amis comes to mind, but I don't think it's him. He came up with this idea of radical chic, and I think it was the 80s, or maybe even before, could be the 70s or late 60s, where wealthy New Yorkers would rub shoulders and organise fundraising for radical groups, radical Marxist groups like the Black Panthers and stuff like this. But at the end of the day, they're the problem, yeah? They're the people at the top. But they're still rubbing shoulders with these radicals, and I think that's going to bring me to my next video, actually. So I'll leave this one there, and the next one I'll talk about radical chic. Slán leat.